there's different aspects to symbolism. One of them is evil. There's the issue of what is symbolism, but there's also the issue of who's behind it, who's using this symbolism. And I do think it is meant to modify the consciousness of people without them knowing. I do think that is happening, and I think now it's kind of accelerated, and they're doing public events, like you said, and they're getting weirder and weirder too. Like they're becoming explicitly subversive, and I think we need to kind of fight against it. What we need to not do is just ignore the reality of it. This is what a lot of people do. Yeah, we need to acknowledge it and fight it. And the way we fight it is to understand the symbolism. Once you see the patterns and you know them, you can't get influence without your knowledge, because you recognize it immediately. You recognize. So when you see it is when you don't get influence subtly. The people who use symbolism in a kind of a magical, subtle way where they influence your mind directly without you knowing, the thing they don't want you to do is to learn symbolism. They don't want you to learn symbolism because then they won't be able to subtly influence you. See, the solution to the elitists' evil symbolism is to learn it. Learn the traditional symbolism and learn how to understand it and recognize it, you know.
Matthieu Pageau, we finally made it happen. Your book, The Language of Creation, is now out in Spanish. And shout out to our friend Sebastián Girado for the tremendous translation work. I'm sure that after this conversation, many people will want to read this fantastic work that, it started the whole movement in the original English language and is slowly gaining ground in Spanish-speaking countries as well. So thank you for being here.
Yes, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure too. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about the power of symbols, what we mean by that. So in the first part of the conversation, we will learn the basics of symbolism. What are symbols and why symbols are not something kind of arbitrary that we invent or just subjective interpretations, but a bridge between heaven and earth, and between the visible and the invisible, and what we mean by that. And then in the second part of the conversation, we'll explore the impact symbols have on the human psyche, and how certain groups invert them, corrupt them, and use them ritually to gain control over the minds, and how some symbols may in fact invoke spiritual entities that, exert influence over particular aspects of reality. So let's start with the basics. Matthieu, as you know, colloquially, people use the idea of symbolic to kind of refer to something that does not designate reality as it is, right? Only it's kind of like a metaphorical approximation. That's a symbol for them. However, that's not what the symbol is. So, I guess, what is symbolism? What are symbols? And maybe if you can give some examples, if you can.
Yeah, well, I think it's a language that's more ancient than the verbal language that we usually use. I think it's just more ancient. It doesn't mean it's more primitive in this sense than the bad sense of the word. It doesn't mean it can express less, or it doesn't mean it's not as precise or anything like that, because you can use verbal language similarly. You can use it in a precise way or not. You could say general things, or you could say specific things. So that's one thing we have to remember. If we want to compare symbolism to verbal language, we have to be fair, because sometimes people kind of attack this thing called symbolism by showing that it can be vague or it can be confused. But the truth of the matter is verbal language can also be vague and confused. So that's not a legitimate criticism. We have to be fair, when we compare things. So the question is always, is the symbolism I'm looking at now, is it vague and confused, or is it well expressed? It's the same thing with verbal language. So we have to use the same standard here when we compare things. So can symbolism be arbitrary? Yes, it can be arbitrary. Does that mean it usually is? Not necessarily, but that's the real question is this what I'm looking at now an example of good symbolism or of superficial symbolism or misunderstood symbolism or confused symbolism? Because, in the past, I believe that the people who wrote the ancient texts and who, were the founders of civilizations understood these things, and they were able to express things with true symbolism, with deep symbolism. Now, does that mean anyone who wants to express something using that language, does that mean they're always doing it correctly? No. I think today many people try to use symbolism to express certain ideas, and they end up doing it wrong or not giving the message that they intend to give. No, so that's one thing. The other thing is you can use symbolism to express messages that are not good. You can do that too. So that's another issue. I mean, the issue of using symbolism in a way that's detrimental, or using it in a good way. That's another issue, because you could be an expert at expressing things with symbolism, with that language. You can be really, really smart at doing that, but have evil intentions. So that's the other issue that we have to not confuse here. So, like, for example, if you see, like you said at the beginning, there's the issue of what is symbolism, but there's also the issue of who's behind it, who's using this symbolism. But again, we have to not do double standards. Verbal language is also the same. You can use somebody wicked can write a book or have a debate or something, have ill intentions in his using of verbal language. Same thing with symbolism. So some people can be subversive and use symbolism in a way that has evil aims for us, let's say, for the people who are seeing it or participating in it. So that's another issue that we can maybe talk about. But that being said, if we say what is symbolism, I would say the easiest way to understand it is it's basically using exemplars as a language. So, for example, if I want to say, what's a chair? Let's say we always use this example in philosophy, I guess, the chair for some reason. So what's a chair? I could describe it verbally, but I could also just show you a chair, right? I mean, just show you an example of a chair. So you have to understand, though, that it's an example of a chair. So let's say the chair that I show you is blue. Then this is where you can have some confusion in symbolism. So is the blue that's in the exemplar that I showed you of a chair, is that part of what a chair is or not? You see, this is the kind of question we have to ask ourselves. So it's basically using an instance of an idea, using an example as a language to express the idea. That's how I would describe a symbol. So, of course, there's all kinds of problems that can come with that. And there's ways to mediate these problems. So for example, I could draw you a picture of a chair that might actually be a better way to show you what the pattern of the chair is without necessarily making it a specific color. So you wouldn't think that the color is part of the meaning of the chair, because it isn't. You can make a chair with different colors. So that's part of the problem of symbolism. But this is not a problem that the ancients didn't know about. They knew. So when they used this language to express certain ideas, they made sure that they used examples and models to express ideas in a way that made sense. So they didn't arbitrarily use, like most people when they think of symbolism, they think of it's just an arbitrary meaning that I'm giving to something, like I could take an object and say this means this is hard for me when I have to find bad examples. It's always difficult for me because I just can't do it. Like if I show you a book and I say, what does this symbolize, this book? And I say, it symbolizes strength. What? Why? So the idea is, of course, you could do that. Somebody could do that. That's the thing. When we say, is symbolism an arbitrary association of meaning? It can be. Somebody could do that. Somebody could falsely say that this book here symbolizes strength. You see? So we have to be careful always, but just there's ways to know if it makes sense or not, really. So does the idea of a book, or does a book express this idea of strength? No, it doesn't really. It expresses some other ideas. So it expresses the idea maybe of memory, of information. These are things that a book might express. These are really abstract ideas, right? The idea of information or the idea of language is an abstract thing. A book is a concrete thing. So if I want to express the idea of memory or of fixing information, making it fixed, making it stable, I could show you a book and say this expresses these ideas, right? So obviously, this is how symbolism works. You use an example to express an abstraction, and of course, you can do it well or not well. Always, this is true of all knowledge, of all communication. It can always be falsely done. So we have to be careful not to, let's say, accuse all symbolism of being false or confused or random just because some people out there may be using it in that way.
So in this way, we can say that the symbolism of the Bible, specifically the Genesis, which is what you write about in your book, is an example of good symbolism that uses images, narratives, expresses ideas in a way that they really, really connect with something higher, that is a pattern of meaning that we cannot really invent. It's just there, and we point to it, right? Kind of like that.
Yes, exactly. So it's a language that can be used well or not. And I'm saying, and many other people are saying, that the ancient texts, the ancient myths, and the Bible, for example, are a good use of symbolism. So at one point, if you don't know the language, you have to kind of have a little bit of trust in certain things, because as anything, at first, when you don't know something, you have to at least allow the possibility, that something is good or not. And then once you do that, then you can start learning it. And then once you learn it, then you can develop the mind for yourself to recognize what's good and what's not, what's even what's useful and what's not. I mean, you could have, there's many criteria that you could use. I mean, you could say this is useless. This symbolism stuff is useless. I don't think so. So many people think that. So there's many criteria that you personally can use to decide if symbolism is something useful. I think it is, and it's the reason why our ancestors used it. And the other reason is because it's a very effective means of communication. Because language changes, right, over time. When I say language, I mean verbal communication. It changes a lot over time, a lot more than people think, actually. Changes a lot. So how do you ensure that the information that you're communicating is stable over time? If you use verbal language, it's not really that stable, actually. If something happens to your civilization, some kind of problem, if there's an exile of the people or something like that, then you lose the information that your ancestors communicated to you, because the language that you had can be lost or forgotten, or it can change over time, or it can be mixed with other languages. All kinds of things can happen to verbal language, right? But symbolism is a lot more stable, actually, than verbal language, because it's based in objects and things. So if you use things that are universal, then the meaning that you want to express is stable, because these things are not going to go away. So, for example, a book is something that has been there for a while. So if you wanted to communicate the idea of memory or word and memory, you could use a book as a symbol. But we see now that maybe eventually there won't be any more books, right? It could happen. I hope it doesn't, frankly. But this is something that we could now kind of foresee on the horizon, that at one point physical books maybe won't even exist anymore. Hopefully not. But if that were to happen, then all the symbols of the past that used a book, then all the people that wanted to communicate some ideas through this concrete object called a book, then that meaning indeed could be lost to future generations if they don't know what a book is. So there's always the danger, again, just like verbal language, there's the danger of losing some knowledge if you use symbolism to communicate ideas, because the medium that you use, the objects that you use as expressions of an idea cannot be used anymore, can disappear. So this is always a danger. But to me, this danger is a lot bigger in verbal language. Verbal language changes much, much more than than what we're talking about here. So before there's no more books, by the time there's no more books, the language will have changed already more. So all these issues are important, but we have to be fair in our comparison, you see, of symbolism and verbal language. We have to be fair, because people often have double standards. Like they'll criticize something, and then the other options are not better. So the criticism really isn't that useful when you do something like that.
Matthieu, you are particularly interested in the story of the fall, right? So it happens to me as well. I'm very, very interested about that story. So let's use for a moment this story as an example of symbolism. Why the story of the fall points to certain patterns, certain ideas that are not only present in that particular moment of history, if you may, but it's something that is already happening to us today, and it's actually happening to us today and tomorrow and every single day.
Yes. Yeah, that's the idea generally, is to communicate something. And this is a mistake some people make, to think that these stories are talking about past events. And they are, but they're talking about, as you said, universal events that express a meaning that's always present. See? So they're expressing truths, patterns, ways of being, things that happen that are always present, and almost in everything we do, they're present. So in the story of the fall, yeah, you have to understand all these symbols, you see, to understand what it's communicating, obviously. So this is kind of what my book is about. Mostly it's mostly about that symbolism. So the tree, the snake, humanity, what's the function of humanity in this world, the relationship between, let's say, heaven and earth. This is a very important pattern, which can be found in every single culture of the world, actually. It's not just biblical symbolism here. The idea that there's heaven and earth and there's an interaction between these. So basically, we can even say right now what heaven and earth basically is, because we kind of just talked about something related to it when we talk about symbolism. So we could say that heaven is the pattern, or the idea, or the meaning. Okay, the meaning, and then the earth has all the materials that can create them physically. They express them, So if I say there's the idea of a book, and then I say there's paper, and then I bring those together, I form the book out of paper, and now I have an object. That's a combination of an idea and some materials, and it creates this object that has a meaning, that has it's not just a random object, obviously. So this is what's really symbolism is. It's about recognizing that things have a purpose, or they're part of a plan, let's say. It's about recognizing that in things. You see a thing, you ask yourself, what is the purpose of this thing, right? And this is what science kind of doesn't do. It does at some level sometimes. I mean, it sees things as part of a whole and can ask, what's the purpose of this part in this whole? So science also talks about purpose, but symbolism is really focused on the idea of purpose. So if I see a cup, I could say, what is the idea behind this object? And it turns out the ideas behind certain objects are really profound and really important for us. And they express general patterns. You see, they express general patterns that we find in all our lives, in many events, not just in this object called the cup. We find the idea of the cup is also expressed in many other ways in our lives, and not necessarily through a physical cup. See, that's the thing. The idea can express itself in many, many different ways. And once you grasp the idea, then you recognize that same idea or that same pattern in many different manifestations. And this is what symbolism is for, really. It's about grasping some patterns that are universal. They're not contingent, or they're not just temporal. They're always there. They're present in everything we do. So it's about using, usually when symbolism is used really well, it's about using things that are accessible to us, that are concrete, that are real, and extracting what's the purpose of this concrete object. And then once you understand that, you have the idea, you see. And once you have the idea, then you can perceive many things as being expressions of that idea. And that's I think the purpose of symbolism, is to bring many of the things in our lives into simple ideas. Once you do that, I think this is what knowledge really means, actually. When I say knowledge, this is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about seeing an idea in reality, seeing it being expressed concretely. That's real knowledge. Just ideas is not worth much, and just things, if you don't know what they mean or what they're for, it's not much. But when you join those two, then that's knowledge. So, but in terms of the story of Adam and Eve, it's a particular strong story, which is kind of about what I'm talking about here, actually, the joining of heaven and earth. So it describes Adam as the joining of heaven and earth. So dust from the earth, and then a breath from God, joined together in a human being. So that's an example of a symbol right there, really. Then we can ask ourselves, what is the purpose of man, and what is the purpose of, let's say, Adam? What is the purpose of Eve? What is the snake? What does it represent? What is the tree? Why is there a tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and bad? These are all questions that you have to ask yourself. And the idea, of course, is not just to see it as something that happened in the past. And this is one of the most detrimental things that happened, I would say, in religion, is when we started sometimes, and often, I would say, seeing biblical narratives as just things that happened in the past, just a description of events. Because when you do that, then you stop asking questions. You stop asking questions about it. You stop trying to figure out what it means, right? I mean, then you just accept that this happened, and that's the end of it. So it's kind of the worst mentality that you can have when you read, let's say, the Bible or an ancient text, is to think that it's just describing an event, because it closes the thing right there. It's over. You don't need to reflect on it at all once you think like that. You just say, okay, thanks for telling me that happened. That's the end of it. I don't need to think about it. But really, obviously, that's not what it's. If it was only that, this book would not exist anymore. If it was just a description of an event, this book would not exist. It would not have survived the passage of times for so long. If it were just telling us what happened on a Tuesday, let's say, thousands of years ago, who cares? So it's not that. Obviously, we can't think like that. If we think like that, we lose all of it. We lose all of it, because it becomes not important. So that's not how we should think about it.
Yeah, we've been in many ways thinking about the Bible kind of like, maybe this analogy helps understand what we've done. It's like we start telling every single generation that there was a man called Newton, and an apple fell from a tree on his head. That story points to something, to a pattern called gravity. And yeah, we can talk about the story because it really happened. It's an historical event, but it's not really the point, right? The point is like, how am I going to participate in that kind of pattern that the story is pointing to today and tomorrow and every single day?
Yes, that's actually a really good example of a scientific story, of a scientific symbolic narrative, actually, because it's not really telling us much about gravity when we look at it. It's actually a narrative about discovery, really, more than it is about gravity. But ingeniously, it was combined so that it becomes an expression of this thing called gravity, but also it's an expression of discovery. It's talking about science itself in general, that story. It represents being hit by an idea that you didn't intend, right? It's an accidental discovery. So it's like he had what it takes to receive this discovery. If it would have been someone else, he would have been hit on the head with an apple, but it would not have caused him to understand anything. He would have just gotten angry at the apple, let's say. But in this case, this person was he was an adequate receptacle for this idea, which was gravity, this general concept. So when the apple hits, then it causes you to get the idea, right? So it's a very interesting story. This is a good example of a symbolic story. And it's interesting that you see, you have the tree, you have the fruit, it's almost a story of Adam and Eve. It's close, it's not the same, it's not expressing the same thing, but there's similar symbols in there. You see the
Yeah,
tree, the
very,
fruit, and the
very
fruit
similar.
hits him on the head.
And this kind of like desire for something higher, the desire for knowledge.
Yes.
In the case of Newton, he really wants to understand something that he doesn't understand yet. In the case of Adam and Eve, they've been fooled. Why? Because they really want something higher, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, very interesting. The apple fell on him. It wasn't him that reached for it. Yeah, so you can understand a lot of things with this story. And it's interestingly, it's not even a biblical story, but we see that this story persists. You see, it persists over time. So because it's expressing, symbolically expressing a truth about science, about learning, about the idea that real discoveries kind of fall on you, right? It's not you that really find them. It happens to you. It falls on you. See? And it's a very good example. So we could look at it historically and say this probably didn't happen, or we could do all kinds of historical analysis with that and then claim that it didn't happen or whatever. But you see how not really important it is that much that it happened or not, because it did happen in the sense that what this thing represents definitely happened. Somebody did discover gravity. This what it actually described happened, this discovery. So whether or not he actually received a fruit on the head is actually not that important. You see that. So this is the kind of thing in the Bible too. Sometimes, I get asked, do you actually think it happened, this event, especially when it's weird events, miraculous events and things like that. And I'm like, sure. You see, I mean, it's not the most important thing. I think it all happened because I believe in miracles and things like that. I'm not a materialist, so it's not hard for me to accept these stories that have strange miracles in them. But obviously, the idea is to understand what the miracles mean. See, that's what you really have to do is try to understand what the miracles mean. And usually when you start to have the right mind to understand these things, you kind of start thinking probably it did happen too, because it kind of modifies your way of thinking. In order to understand what these miracles mean, you have to think in a certain way, and you have to see the universe in a certain way as being, you have to have the right cosmology. And once you have the right cosmology, then it actually kind of makes sense that it happened, and you don't have any problem believing that these miracles happen. Obviously, if you're a materialist, obviously you can't believe these miracles. So there's nothing to talk about really. Because sometimes it's the materialists that will kind of try to poke at me, do you actually believe this happened, and trying to make a fool out of me or something, they do that, let's say, to believers and Christians. But really it doesn't bother me, because if you are a materialist, you cannot believe these stories. That's the end of it. There's no discussion to be had, really. It's like you already have this cosmology that you're sure of. You're sure that the universe works in this way. So it doesn't admit to these things. So that's the end of the discussion. So either you change your cosmology or I change mine. We're at an impasse, really. There's nothing to discuss. So there is something to discuss, and that's why symbolism is important. The thing there is to discuss is, what does it mean? What does this miracle mean? We could both agree, with an atheist, let's say, we can both agree that maybe we should try to find out what it means, though. Instead of arguing whether or not it happened, we could both maybe agree on what it means, and then that's possible. I've talked sometimes to some atheists that they're still atheists. They're not, I haven't converted them to anything, they remain what they are. And they still agree on the meaning of it in the end. They still agree on the meaning of the event or the miracle. And it's not all about miracles. All the events in the Bible are meaningful. They're expressing a higher truth, but usually it's the miracles that bother people because they don't fit the worldview that we currently have, let's say materialism. It just doesn't fit. So it's easy to poke at it and kind of show that it doesn't make any sense. But really, it makes perfect sense if you have the right mindset and you're trying to understand what truth is this miracle expressing, instead of focusing on how does this miracle happen? How does it work? Like, what is it? what force of nature caused this miracle to happen, or how did the atoms align themselves in a way such that the Red Sea was split, or once you try to understand what it means, and you understand that it's, like we said before, a universal thing that keeps happening, is always happening, then your mind kind of changes. You stop thinking more in terms of let's say mechanical causality, based on a certain cosmology that we have, that we maybe assume a little bit too much that it's complete. Science has the right ideas about a lot of things, but the assumption that it's complete maybe is going a little bit too far. That's the problem, and science isn't never supposed to do that anyway. So the real scientific mind is not supposed to close off its model of the universe. You just close it off to what we currently know and laugh at everything else that doesn't fit. It's supposed to keep an open mind always about, maybe there's things we don't know. Maybe our model that explains, let's say, chemical reactions is not a model that is big enough to explain, let's say, I was going to say a miracle, but even before that, it doesn't explain why I get up in the morning. It doesn't explain why I have a desire to build things, or why I have this or that. It explains so little, actually. It explains, well, if you limit yourself to analyzing chemical reactions, then that's what you explain. It's pretty simple, right? You close off your knowledge, which is a good thing. You specialize, right? We are going to study chemical reactions. That's fine. Study that. But then maybe your science is limited by this specialization, which is a good thing, because then you don't get confused too much, and you're able to see more. In a way, when you specialize, you're able to see more. You're going more into detail, and you see more, and you become more precise in your knowledge. So, but then you have to be careful not to think that this field that you created, this branch of knowledge that you created, encompasses the whole tree, right? It doesn't. Yeah. So this is always just, we have to always have an open mind about, maybe things are outside my system of understanding. This is absolutely important. You don't have to be a religious person to think like that. You could be a scientist. And actually, science used to be the way of thinking that was open-minded to new discoveries, but now it looks kind of like it closed on itself in a way, and it stopped searching for certain things. It just closed it off.
They don't like thinking about the idea that they can't explain the totality of reality. And I don't know why they don't like it, because, for example, I have your book here. It's thanks to scientific advancement that we have this. This is a technology, right? So we have your book. And science can explain actually the materiality of this, and how it was produced, and how it can be used. But it will never explain why you sat down for years and years and years to write this down. That's not the dominion of science, and it cannot be.
Yeah, and it's fine. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, because sometimes I talk about science, and people think I'm attacking it or something. No, absolutely not. I just think it has a place, and that place, it's not science is really the problem. The problem is people who usually aren't scientists, actually, who usually don't know much about science, but then they put science in a place that's maybe a little bit too high, almost like as if it was a religion or something. And these are usually the people that put science in a place that's too high. That's, I don't know what else to say. Scientists usually don't even do that. So it's not really about science. It's about putting science in a place that it shouldn't be, putting it as a kind of a religious belief or something. Mm-hmm, exactly. And same thing with materialism. Materialism is useful, actually, but you have to see it in its place. It explains matter. That's it. But if you think the whole of it is explained by materialism, then that's fine. But you're going to miss out on a lot of things that are actually real, that you're just going to neglect when you encounter them. You're just going to say that it's just in somebody else's head, or it's just in my head, or it's just a placebo. There's little corners of materialism that you just push them under the rug, let's say. So if anything ever happens that doesn't fit materialism, you can just say that it's a placebo, or someone's crazy, or you can just deny it. You can do that with anything. If you don't want to see certain things, you can always not see them. It's not that hard. So this is the danger of it. There's things you can't see if you don't want to see, and you really always have a narrative that you can use to explain away things. I mean, I've seen some really weird stuff in my life, and people around me explain them in a way that was just basically, it's always not much the explanation. It's always someone's crazy, or because crazy doesn't mean anything really. Crazy just means I don't understand what it is. Therefore, I call it crazy or nonsensical or absurd or not real. If you have as the possibility of an explanation that something could be just in your head, then everything then can be just in your head. I could say the same about science too. It's like you show me a theory and it works, and I just say, yeah, but it's all in your head. Okay, that's the end of it. So that should never be an explanation, because you could cancel out anything with that, with the idea of craziness or the idea of just in your head or placebo. Any phenomenon can be explained through that, even the scientific phenomenon. So this is something I really dislike.
Well, speaking of crazy things, we're going to go into crazy territory here a little bit. This is just a speculation, of course. We're having fun using symbolic principles to kind of like break down reality. And, many people are seeing that there are major events that gather the masses, the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympic Games, or international artist concerts, or, well, even presidential inaugurations, and they have become filled with strange and grotesque symbols. And of course, the creators of such events insist that this is just an artistic representation, that there is no purpose. Just pure entertainment. Nothing really means nothing. But, people are starting to see that this is kind of like a facade, and these grand events are operating as kind of like rituals, almost, kind of like they are filled with symbols that they are designed to provoke something, but they don't really know what. So there is kind of like some occult ritualization. So I would like to ask you, Matthieu, what do you think about these kind of like strange rituals? What is the relationship between a ritual and a symbol? Because it's not the same, but they are very, very, very related. And is this intuition of many people that these kind of like symbols, they can bypass conscious filters and penetrate directly into the deepest layers of the psyche and produce very particular reactions? Or is it just crazy stuff and there's nothing about it?
Yeah, no, there's obviously something about it. I mean, at this point, I think, in a way, whoever's doing these things, these rituals, they're kind of making a mistake. If you ask me, they're making people see this symbolism. They're making people become interested in it, not necessarily in a good way, in the sense that they're giving it a bad name, obviously, because most of the time, some people are so convinced by this idea that whenever they see something that looks like symbolic communication, they immediately suspect evil, right? Mm-hmm. So as if this is the language of the evil elite, symbolism, let's say,
yeah, this is for the bad people. People use symbols, but we, the normal people, we have nothing to do with symbols or with symbolism. That's what they believe, right?
Exactly. So every time you see a symbol, it's evil. Okay. So, but actually, obviously, that's not the case. So then the problem with that is then you can look at ancient symbolism and then see it as evil, and then start thinking that there's always been an evil cabal, that was controlling things by manipulation, using symbolism. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's always been one. Has it always been as influential as it is now? Probably not. I don't think so. Maybe there were periods of time where there were these elites that were manipulating people with symbols. I think it's possible that in the past there was. But the idea that this is always the case, I think, is just an exaggeration. But I do agree that it's happening now. I do agree that, but it's been happening for a long time, honestly. It's just that now it's becoming a little more obvious, a little harder to deny. But I mean, when I watch, let's say, movies from the 80s and 90s, and when I watch shows, let's say sitcoms and things like that, I just see symbolism everywhere. I mean, I see it as a form of propaganda using symbolism in a way, in the way that you kind of described there, in a way where it's subtly putting patterns in your mind that you're meant to reproduce, or that are meant to change your way of seeing things. So if you look at TV shows from the past, it's almost all propaganda. If you understand a little bit the language of symbolism, you see it. They're doing all these patterns that they're repeating constantly. And I do think it is meant to modify the consciousness of people without them knowing. I do think that is happening. And I think now it's kind of accelerated, and they're doing public events, like you said. And they're getting weirder and weirder too. Like they're becoming explicitly subversive, which in the past they were not explicitly subversive. But it's kind of not true though. If you understand some of the patterns, you see that it was explicitly subversive in the past, but it was often done with humor. You see, this is what they did. This is very clever. Using humor, you could kind of test the boundaries of things. So if you're a subversive person, you can use humor in that way to test the boundary of someone. And then if they don't like what you're doing, you say, it's just a joke, calm down, calm down. And if they accept it, then you've made them accept something that was outside of their boundaries, that was outside of what they find acceptable. So humor can be used in that way, as a kind of slow progression of an idea into someone's consciousness. And it's a safe way to do it. Let's say if you're a subversive person, the safest way to subtly convince someone of an idea that he doesn't already have or that he's resisting is to use humor. Because like I said, if the person reacts negatively, you could just say, calm down, it's just joking, we're just joking here, So that's kind of one of the functions of humor. It's not the only one, but so I think in the past it was done with humor, mostly. And maybe some movies that weren't humorous but still had symbolism in it, but most of it was done through humor. When I say was done through, I mean the subversive element of symbolism. And now I think it's being done more openly, without humor. And if you react to it now, they just say something like what you said before. It's all in your head. You're crazy. It's so ridiculous. It doesn't make sense anyway. I mean, we just put all these things together in a kind of event, but it doesn't mean anything. Sure. That's just a lame excuse, but it's not as strong as the humor thing. Actually, I think they're making a mistake, really, if they're trying to keep doing these influences. But I mean, it is that, because so there's different aspects to symbolism. One of them is evil. One of them is I'm trying to express a truth through symbolism that I want people to understand through direct knowledge, right? Because it's not the same as verbal language. When you see a real thing that expresses a meaning, you can participate in it. You can integrate it into your concrete reality, and that has more impact than just words, right? Because like when we say actions speak louder than words. This is kind of a truth of symbolism, actually. This is the truth of symbolism. Actions speak louder than words. If events, things that happen, speak louder than just words. And you can use that for good. You can use that for evil. You can use the idea that events express strong meaning and are convincing. And you can create some fake events if you want. I mean, this is what I guess a ritual is. No, some rituals are good. Some rituals are bad. You can create some events, but you see, the difference is always in the intent behind it. If you go to a church and there's rituals, it's not a secret, subtle influence trying to subvert you. It's clear what we're doing. We're doing this ritual. Like, let's say you're baptized. It's a ritual. We're not secretly influencing you. We're telling you you're getting baptized. This is a direct form of communication of knowledge. Then you do the ritual, and the ritual in the action of the baptism contains the meaning. the meaning of death and rebirth and all of that, which is what baptism is about, cleansing of the past and such things. But nobody's trying to fool you, right? Nobody's trying to trick you into accepting this or that. Whereas in the other case that you described, let's say the Olympic thing that was ridiculous, we know that they're trying to fool, because if you ask them, is this a ritual? Is this and then they say no. And obviously I don't believe that. So it means it's like we have the proof that they're kind of evil, because they're saying they're not doing a ritual when they clearly are, which means they're doing something subversive under subtly without your knowledge. Because if it was with your knowledge, they would say, yes, we're doing a ritual, like they do in a church. In church, they say we're doing a ritual. They don't pretend they're not doing one and then do one. So that's basically the difference between the two. One of them is kind of without your knowledge of it, and the other one is with your knowledge, with your consent, we could say. So we could say the evil aspect of symbolism is kind of comparable to something like rape or something. It's comparable to that, because you're receiving some knowledge, you're receiving some influence, I should say, more than knowledge, the word influence. You're being influenced without knowledge. So it's comparable to something like rape, really. You don't have a consent of being implanted with this idea. It's like a seed that's implanted in you without your consent. That's the definition of rape, I would say. So yeah, they're like rapists of the symbolic universe. That's what I would see them as. So yeah, I think that's pretty evil, and I think it's real. And I think people are right to see it and are right to be worried about it. And I think we need to kind of fight against it. What we need to not do is just ignore the reality of it. This is what a lot of people do. Yeah, we need to acknowledge it and fight it. And the way we fight it is, unfortunately, is with symbolism. It's the only way to fight it, actually, is to understand the symbolism. Once you see the patterns and you know them, you can't get influence without your knowledge, because you recognize it immediately. You recognize. So when you see it is when you don't get influence subtly. So I mean, I'll give a concrete example here. I noticed at one point that I was watching some shows, some, let's say, sitcoms from the past, because I don't watch modern shows because they're really horrible. But in the past there were some decent shows. And at one point I noticed that every time there was a Christmas episode, like there's usually Christmas specials when they have these shows, there was always something like a desecration of the Christmas tree, like in the show, like the tree falls or it's thrown on the ground, or there's always something to kind of attack Christmas. Okay, I noticed that at one point, and I saw many of these examples of this. Okay, so when you don't see it, I can imagine, if you don't perceive it, that it influences you subtly without you knowing it, subconsciously, into kind of a desecration of this holiday, let's say, without you knowing it. So you don't know why, but you become cynical about Christmas, let's say. You don't even realize, and then you pass that on to your children or whatever. But if you see it, then it has the opposite effect. If you know that, if you recognize the pattern, why is it always a Christmas tree falling down, or why is it always something like that happening during these Christmas specials and different shows? Once you see it, then it has the opposite effect. You see the influence. You see the wizard behind the trick, trying to trick you. It's like you see behind the curtain, you see the guy trying to do the magic trick instead of being fooled by the trick. So it has the opposite effect, and you react usually in a defensive way. It's like it does the opposite. Instead of influencing you against it, it will probably do the opposite. You see, and you say, there's these wizards trying to convince me that Christmas is bad. Maybe Christmas is good. Maybe why are they trying to convince me so strongly that there's something wrong with this holiday? Maybe something's good about it that they don't like. And then it kind of has the opposite effect, which is what it does to me now. When I see in movies and shows, when I see attempts at subtly influencing my mind, it does the opposite. I react. You see, I react to it negatively. So it kind of reinforces my protection against these subtle influences. So the way to defend ourselves against this type of symbolism is to learn symbolism correctly, not just because the people who use symbolism as in a kind of a magical, subtle way where they influence your mind directly without you knowing, the thing they don't want you to do is to learn symbolism. They don't want you to learn symbolism because then they won't be able to subtly influence you. See?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why, again, that's why this book is so important. It was very, very important to me personally when I first read it, and is now for me more relevant than ever because we finally have it in Spanish. So, Matthieu, let's take this one step further, right? I really want to know your opinion about something that is at the core of many ancient cosmologies, right? So we're talking about symbols as pointing to patterns, right? And how we constantly are embodying patterns or modes of being, right? Because basically to live is to embody patterns that are above us, that transcends us. So from the moment that we come into the world, our psyche is reproducing patterns like joy, sadness, fear, right? And our interaction with matter is an interaction with patterns, like water is H2O, right? That's a pattern, right? And our social structures are patterns, like family, community, city, nation, and even our language right now is reproducing itself a pattern, right? And now, when someone is kind of like participating in a pattern, is giving body to the pattern, right? When someone feels envy, for example, he becomes literally a visible vehicle for an invisible pattern called envy. And when someone feels joy, his joyful behavior is the visible manifestation of that invisible mode of being or pattern, not immaterial idea called joy, right? Now, and here is where many, many ancient cosmologies tells us something that I really want to know your opinion about. It is when we give body or embody a pattern, we are associating ourselves with the spirit that is ruling over that pattern. And now, of course, the word spirit can be used in two ways. One is kind of like an abstraction pointing to uncommon purpose, right? This soccer team has this kind of spirit that unites the participant toward one purpose, right? And the nation has this kind of spirit, or this ideology has this kind of spirit, or a virtue. A virtue has one spirit, but it also refers really to an intelligence with concrete operativity. Entities that can act as benefactors or destroyers, basically. And over the centuries, again, many, many, many traditions have believed that every aspect of creation has kind of like a tutelary entity, a spirit, an intelligence that has will, and that is ruling over that certain pattern or aspect of reality. So let's speculate a little bit about this from a symbolic perspective. What do you think about it?
Yeah, of course it's true. Now you're going into territory where people who are a little bit more inclined to be physicalists or materialists, maybe, but just physicalists, obviously will just reject these things. But so that's one thing. If you reject it, you reject it. You can't. There's nothing you could do to be convinced about it. Like if you reject the idea that there are subtle realms, there's things that exist that are more subtle. If you reject that, then there's not much to be done to convince. But I mean, the idea is, you can take concrete examples to understand this stuff. Even though, I mean, if I say there's this category called, let's say, a king. It's a category, right? A king. It's an abstraction, really. I can try to understand what that is. I can use it to perceive reality. Is this a king? No. Is this a king? Yes. Okay. I could use that as a lens to determine what things are. But this category is not the same as a king, right? See, this is kind of where this is leading. There's a difference between the category of a king and a king, right? So are there kings? Yes. there are kings that embody what a king is, see? And if I want to interact with a king, I'm going to have to encounter an actual king, not the idea of a king, you see? So I agree with what you're saying. There are entities that are embodiments of higher patterns, abstract patterns. They're embodiments of it. Just like a king is an embodiment of that pattern, an actual king is an embodiment of the pattern of a king. So if I want to commune with the pattern of the king, I have to commune with an actual king, you see? Because the pattern of a king is not a king. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, it's true with everything. It's like, you don't even have to think about spirits and things that are subtle and things like that. I mean, I can know what a spoon is, but if I want to commune with a spoon, I have to commune with an actual spoon, not just the idea of a spoon. If I want to participate in this being called the spoon, I have to have a real spoon. So if with just the idea, you see? So I'm just using as base examples I could find just to show that it's nothing weird about this. It's just that if you accept the idea that there are invisible beings that are not physical in the usual way, then it's the same idea. You can interact with these embodiments of actual beings. They're beings. They have intelligence, like you said. They have intelligence. They have will. So like an angel is an example. I mean, an angel is a being. It's not a category. It's not an abstract category. It's a being. It's with intelligence, with faculties, with all these things that is expressing an idea. It has a mission. Let's say we could say it like that. An angel has a mission. It's not just acting on its own. It's expressing a higher mission that comes, let's say, from God. When we usually talk about angel, it means it comes from God. So he's got either a message to convey or an action to do. He's an agent, really. But it's a real being. It's not just a category, an abstract category, right? So it's the same. Yeah, I agree. That's the traditional way of seeing things. There are beings, there are subtle beings, angels in his example, demons in his example. Maybe even others. There's others, I think, elves and such. I think they exist. They don't exist in the way that most people think of existence, but there's fairies and there's all these beings that all the traditions of the world's had. They all share in common, by the way. You look at all traditions of the world, even when they don't communicate with each other because they're too far apart, they never discovered each other. They all have the same little creatures and little entities, trickster entities, and dwarves and Bigfoot, things like this. They all the peoples of the world have these beings in their cosmology. Why is that? I mean, it's kind of weird to think that it's just based on nothing. I think it's not. It just maybe don't exist in the same way that we usually think of existence in a merely physical way. I think they can manifest sometimes physically too. It's not because we don't find things that they don't exist. That's such a ridiculous idea. It's like if you ask, let's say someone asked me, do you think Bigfoot is real? This thing is real, called Bigfoot or whatever you call it. It doesn't matter what it's called really, but these hybrids, sure, why not? And if someone, I mean, it's not because I haven't seen these things that they don't exist. I mean, that's really naive way of thinking. I've encountered some weird things in my life. I wouldn't talk about it necessarily because it's always just being labeled crazy if you do. This is the problem. People, there's a certain way of thinking where you don't listen to anyone. There's so many testimonies of these encounters, but if you don't want to hear it, you don't want to hear it. You can just say they're all crazy. See, it's so easy to do. You have this guy who says his testimony, I saw this creature, this weird creature. You can always dismiss it and say it's all in your head, or you misread it, you missaw it, you hallucinated. There's always, you can easily get out of it. But when there's thousands of people who testify, about their experiences with certain beings that are not human, At one point, you got to stop just saying it's all in your head. At one point, you got to start. It's almost a scientific principle. You have to start thinking that maybe this is something, and maybe it's just not in the realm of what we're used to. Maybe it's not like seeing a deer. You know what I mean? It might be of a different category, or more subtle. So yeah, I do agree 100% that these beings exist. It's in the Bible. It's in all religions. So, and I mean, yeah, it exists.
Yeah, our mutual
I don't
friend.
think you can convince anyone of it, though.
No, of course, but that's why this example that our mutual friend Ignacio puts is very revealing to me, especially for those kind of people that don't easily believe in these things, right? That how a pattern is tied maybe to a spirit, and maybe that spirit is not something you don't understand it in the same way that I do, but music represents a pattern. That's for sure, right? In this case, it's a rhythmic pattern, right? Let's take the reggaeton music, for example, and let's see what this kind of rhythmic pattern produces in the body. Well, it produces that we start moving certain parts of the body, right? Especially the pelvis, right? So reggaeton, the rhythmic pattern of reggaeton induces us to move in this kind of sexual way, right? This is inclining us towards certain attitudes and behaviors, right? So in this way, we can say that the pattern of reggaeton installs us in a particular spirit, right? And then this can lead to certain behaviors that can be lust, lascivious behavior, sensuality, kind of like it binds us to a more animal or instinctive mode of being, right? So patterns, modes of being, behaviors, and spirits, they are kind of like very, very closely related to each other. In the same way, Gregorian chants, that's inspired by another kind of spirit, right? Because by participating in the rhythmic pattern of a Gregorian chant, we are led to embody something that draws us from animal instinct, and it kind of like elevates us towards something higher, right? So these two rhythmic patterns are governed by very, very different spirits, right?
Yeah, it's a good example. Music is a good example of an influence that is definitely real, undeniably real, and you can be subtly. This is a good example, actually, of something that could be used for evil, actually, in the sense that it can be used to mesmerize and influence people in a way that they're not aware. Because, like you said, music is a kind of powerful influence because it can kind of make you move. It can make you almost. You got to resist it in order to not be moved by it sometimes. And it's also nonverbal usually. So yeah, the music is a good example of let's say, a spirit that can take you over. You can be possessed, like possession. Really, it's not always a negative thing. It could be, well, like in the Bible. This is this is why David is a musician, because he represents kind of the positive aspect of that of music. Is something that can heal you, right? Because in order to be healed, it's not healing doesn't come from rational influence. Usually, it comes from something that you gotta accept that is going to take you over, and that it does. So you got to trust. So this is why healer is someone you got to really, really trust, because it's dangerous to let yourself be taken over by something that's for healing. So music, not many people think of music as related to healing, but well, you guys do, right? You definitely do. But it's not something we encounter often. That music is related to, well, it's in the Bible, right? But it's not like it's explained or anything like that. It's just a fact of it. Actually, we see both in the Bible. We see David is healing, trying to heal Saul with his music, But we also see a place where Saul, it kind of gets taken down by musicians. So it's like he's walking, and then he encounters some musicians that are wandering musicians, and then he just falls to the ground, and he gets possessed by the spirit, and he starts being a musician too, and he starts saying all kinds of strange things. So we kind of see both examples here of how music could take you over. Yeah, so that's a good example. It's like a subtle influence, really. So it's hard to, because anytime you have a subtle influence, you don't necessarily can agree or disagree with it, because it's not like a logical thing. It's not like, let's say in the Bible, when God gives the law, he gives the law to the people, to Moses, through Moses. Then he asks, do you agree? Basically, do you agree to follow these laws? It's like a contract almost. You could say, I agree. And if I agree to follow these laws, because the law is an example of a pattern, right? It's telling you what to do, telling you what to reproduce as in what you do. So you can agree and say, I voluntarily will follow this law now. Now you are it's like a union that you agree to. Okay. But music is more subtle. Music can be used to influence someone without their knowledge, which is why music is so important right now in our culture. I think it is one of those influences that can be used to subvert, actually, not necessarily. See, that's the thing. We always have to see both sides, or else it becomes kind of a little bit too narrow-minded a little bit. But it definitely is an influence that has and can be used to subvert a society. Music can also be used to heal. It can also be used to renew. So yeah, it's a good example of a spirit that can take you over. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking now that in order to help people understand more the language of symbolism, of course, music is a very good example. But usually people go to certain symbols that maybe they think about them in a, well, this is inverted. For example, the pentagram, right? The pentagram is a very good example of a symbol that everybody identifies, and they relate to certain things. But it's not necessarily that, right? Because when we observe the pentagram, we see 5 triangles emerge, and at the top there is a point that remains above the other 4, and well, this can simply represent that unity is ruling over multiplicity, right? So above we have a generating principle, and beneath it we have lesser principles, kind of like that, right? And this reflects the very structure of creation, in which an immaterial spirit, God, rules over the 4 elements or the 4 corners, and the structure of man itself, right? The head and the 4 limbs to execute the action that is directed by the head. So this kind of pattern is not necessarily something negative, but many people, they see the pentagram itself is a subversive symbol. This is something bad. This is something that magicians use. Well, they do use it, right? But they invert it, and they don't necessarily have to put the 4 points the other way around. It's about more like the intention, right? The intention that you are doing something using the symbol to produce some kind of result.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to put some kind of, let's say, simplistic moral meaning to symbols. Like this symbol is evil, or this symbol is good. Like that's usually not how it works. That's not how symbolism works. It's more like you should understand what it means, what it points to in terms of meaning, and then some people can use it for good, some people can use it for bad, like anything. Like people say that about tools, right? We hear that a lot now. Tools, there's nothing bad with the tool, it's how you use it. Well, the same thing with symbols. You can use it for good. You could use it to manipulate people. You can use it to help people understand things. You can use it See, so it's not the symbol itself that's good or bad, it's the intention. And I mean, even the inverted pentagram is probably not just bad. I mean, it can be used probably in terms of meaning. I mean, if you say that the pentagram upright represents a human that's standing, and then if you ask me what does the pentagram upside down means, well, immediately in my mind it says it's sleeping human or a dead human. See, so it's not bad. Sometimes humans are asleep, sometimes they're awake. So the pentagram with the point on top represents, to me, I would say, is someone who's awake and who's consciously doing things. And then when it's upside down, maybe it represents a fallen human, or maybe it represents a human that's asleep. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could say a lot about that, because a human that's asleep is a fallen human, you see. So this is entering into what I'm doing now, working on these things, of the difference between, this is basically the difference between sleep and death, you know. You can use it, but you see, obviously the inverted one is more potentially subversive, you see, because it represents something like death or something like inversion of, but it can still have a meaning that it's not just evil.
Yeah, the Cathedral of Amiens. I'll show the image here. There is this inverted pentagram in this cathedral in France, in Amiens. And when people that they don't really understand symbolism, they look at that, they see the Catholic Church is satanic, right? It's like, no, it can mean many things, right? And you have to read this symbol in the context of where is participating, where is located, right? Ancient people, they knew how to do that very well, and they were not scandalized by it. And in some of the places, of course, like you say, this inverted pentagram can mean the many that gives shape to the one, which is kind of like an inversion of the pattern of creation itself, right? But it all depends. So it's not so. That's why when I see people, especially on Twitter, right, the public forum that today we have, and these people was wearing this thing, he's satanic, or this place in the Vatican has this kind of symbol, this means this is bad. It's like, well, hold on. If you don't know what symbolism is, how can you say what's the meaning? Where is it pointing to, right?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, so it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. If you don't know what it means, then you kind of assign it a very vague intention, you know, like this is evil, or I mean, but what does that really mean? I mean, sometimes it is, obviously, sometimes it is. It's used, can be used in evil rituals. So, but yeah, it's not about. I don't think any symbol is either good or bad. That's not how it works. So it's just, you got to understand what it means, and is it being used properly or not, and is it being used against your will? That's, I think, is the evil of it. When it's used as a kind of a mind control device, see, something that is controlling you without your knowledge of it or your consent of it. That's, I would say, kind of the definition of something evil, and bringing you towards something that is not good for you. Also, it's part of it. Someone can manipulate you through symbolism to do something that is not good for you. Obviously, that's not good, right? But you could do that with language too. I mean, I could use language, all kinds of arguments with linear language or just normal language to convince someone to do something is not good for him. Does that make language bad? Doesn't, obviously. So it's the same deal. But I think people are right now to perceive that there is an evil influence using symbolism in a way that is subversive. I do. So it's like, in a way, I don't want to be too hard on people seeing these things, because they're correct.
Exactly.
And it's like, I don't want to be another person who's just saying, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist," you know, and just laughing at them or something. Because the truth of the matter is, when there's conspiracies, you're allowed to make theories about them, and you should make theories about them. So if there is a conspiracy, you should try to understand what's going on, obviously. Otherwise, you're being possibly led to the slaughter. You know, without knowing it, you're going somewhere you don't want to go. So you should make conspiracy theories when you suspect there's a conspiracy. It's such an obvious thing. I don't even know why I would have to say that, but yeah. So I don't want to criticize people on that end of it. But yeah, I think that the key to it is to understand the symbols, not just see them as a sign of evil. Whenever you see something that looks like it's a symbolic, just see it more as it's a language to express ideas and to participate in these ideas. This may be a little bit the difference between a symbolism and normal language. It's more about participation. You can encounter the real things that are expressing some ideas, and then you can gain knowledge through this participation, which is not this. It's higher kind of knowledge, because when you know something through participation is not the same as hearing about something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of what symbolism can offer, which regular language maybe can't. Is a participation, knowledge through participation in an idea or in a spirit, like you said. Yeah, but it's not about just seeing evil every time we see symbolism. But I mean, I think it's legitimate. Like I said, I think it's legitimate to be careful. You don't want to be controlled in a subtle way by something you don't understand. So there you go. That's why people should try to learn it and see. Then you can see what are they trying to tell me with these symbols. Do I reject it? Do I accept it? But if you don't know what it means and you're still being influenced, then you can't consent, right? You can't consent to this information or this influence. So best is to know what it means, or to only engage with these things with people you trust. That's another option. I mean, if you trust this institution, or if you trust these people, or if you trust, let's say, someone who's a good person, who's a healer, or someone who's a teacher, then you can maybe listen to what they say, even if they're talking with symbols. So it's all about trust. If you don't like the idea of trust, then you just learn it yourself, and then you'll never be tricked. So
Yeah,
that's my
I think
advice,
that
basically.
you have to be very, very, very careful when you notice that there is kind of a strange symbolism, rituals going on, because usually in these days, I don't know if you agree with this, but these kind of massive events that we are going through, like quicker and quicker every time, they are intended to produce responses in people. So, for example, there is a shooting. The shooting is not the final goal of the people that are preparing this shooting, whoever they are, right? I'm not trying to say who
Yeah.
they are, but whoever they are, the final goal of the shooting is not the shooting itself, is to produce a certain response in people. And if you are very quick to judge, and you are very emotional, and you are moved easily by these kind of spirits, and you give body to them, what you are going to do is you are going to do the function of Satan, which is a very interesting idea that you talk about, and you have been talking about very, very recently, which is the difference between Satan as the fallen angel, the entity, and Satan as the function, and why, if you are not very, very careful, before you jump into conclusions and you do certain things, or you criticize certain people or certain institutions or nations, right? You are actually giving body to the function of the fallen angel, not in a proper way, right? Can you explain a little bit more about it?
You mean about just the idea of okay, so just the idea of Satan? Well, yeah, because I talked recently about that.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I'm just trying to differentiate between. It's kind of what we've been doing before too, between the function and a being that embodies the function. So there's the idea in Christianity that there's a being that is fallen, and his function was Satan. It was Satan, which means the adversary, to serve as an adversary. And basically, what I'm just saying is that this function was not evil in itself. The function of adversary, that should be obvious, actually. These are things you need to think concretely in order to understand these things. It takes a concrete mind to understand these things, and then once you do, you could do the correct differentiation. I mean, if I would say it's evil to have the function of adversary, okay? In wartime, if you're in a war, you're doing the function of adversary against your enemy. So if you're in a war, you are going to embody the spirit of the adversary against your enemies, right? So that includes things like being clever, being shrewd, lying, being deceptive. When you're doing war, you've got to be deceptive, right? War is deception, right? I mean, the spirit of war is the spirit of deception. So if you're in a war, obviously you have to do the spirit of the adversary, which includes lots of characteristics, right? You're against your enemy, so your way of being will be the spirit of the adversary. So you're going to cheat, lie. You're going to lie to your enemy. You're going to be deceitful. You're not going to tell your enemy, I'm going to attack here at 12 p.m. tomorrow morning. You're going to try to make it believe that you're going to attack somewhere else, or that you're not going to attack, and then you're going to attack, right? I mean, that's what you do in war. So it's all about deception. So if someone says that the spirit of the adversary is not useful, or is not in itself something, it means they don't know what they're talking about, because there's this thing called war, and it exists, and it's always been part of our history. And so this spirit is useful. Now, what I usually talk about when I talk about this spirit, the spirit, adversarial spirit, we could call it, I'm usually talking about that spirit within, like not against an enemy, but used against yourself. Okay, so the spirit, the adversarial spirit against yourself. Now, what does that look like? It can be fallen or not fallen too. It's always the same issue. So what does it look like to have an adversarial spirit against yourself? Well, that might look like something like criticism, self-criticism is an example. Repentance. In order to repent, you have to accept the spirit against you. You have to have in you as something that's against yourself. Otherwise, there's no repentance, and there's no changing of your false ideas. So when there's a false ideas, you need to. So what's another example of a spirit of inner adversary is a debate. I would say a debate is an example of that. A debate or a competition. Why? Because you're not actually at war with something. You see yourself as part of a group, and then you're having a friendly debate. It's friendly. It's not a real war. So that's an example of an inner adversarial spirit, the spirit of debate. It's a good spirit. It's not necessarily bad. And actually, what things that happened recently are examples of, if you understand symbolism, you could see certain things. So if you change a debate into an assassination, that's an example of, you see, it's something that's found in the Bible many times. It's expressed differently. It's about trying to cause a war, really. When you do that, you're bringing the adversarial spirit that was a good, and you're taking it outside. So now it's war. So now we're enemies. It's a way to become enemies. It's a way to separate people. It's a way to separate something that was once one, make it two, make it real adversaries. So changing a game into a fight is an example. I'm trying to show how you can represent this pattern here. Like in the story of Samson, you could see that pattern that I'm talking about here. There's a wedding. Samson has a wedding with his foreign wife, and then he does a game with the people in the wedding. He kind of does he does some gambling with them. Okay, he does a riddle, and then because of this riddle, it becomes a fight, and then it becomes a war. So the function of Samson was to do that, actually. So Samson is a very mysterious character, but the idea that you can transform the inner adversary into an outer adversary, okay? It's a process. If you want to go to war, that's what you do. You take something that's like a debate. Yeah, you change a debate into a fight. That's a good example. This is what it means in the Bible. I don't want necessarily to get too much into biblical symbolism because I don't know if your audience is really interested in that. But this is what it means, by the way, when it says that Moses changes water into blood. It's the same meaning. Changing water into blood represents what I've been saying here. It's like, because water represents the spirit of renewal. And then if you change it into blood, it means now it's fight. Now we're enemies. Now it's killing, changing into death. So this is an example. There's many examples in the Bible. There's examples of the opposite too, of changing something that's adversarial into something that's helpful. Well, here's the most known example of it. If you go in the other direction, it's the example of the snake on a pole. This is in the story of Moses, right? They get bitten by snakes, poisonous snakes, and then they're dying. And then God tells Moses how to fix the situation. He says, make a snake, a brass snake, and hang it on a pole. So when they're doing that, the snake represents the adversarial spirit, okay? That's basically what the snake represents in that story. It's the enemy, the adversary. So if you take that adversary, that snake spirit, and you put it on a pole, it's actually, the word is the standard. You put it on a standard. It kind of means the opposite. You're changing an enemy into something useful, into something that can be used for healing purposes. These are just examples. So actually, that's kind of interesting because what it says, put the snake on a standard. Well, it's the symbol we use still for medicine, right? The snake on a pole. It means a lot when in the Bible it says, put the snake on a standard. Standard is like a flag, right? It's like something like a flag. So it means something like this snake that was hidden on the ground, that was like invisible or covert. If you put it up in a way that you could see it. And a standard, like I said, is kind of a flag. So it kind of means something like naming the snake. If you name the snake, if you give it an identity, a purpose, a function, a plan, then it can be used for good, for healing in that case. So you can use the snake to heal the snake, but you got to put it on a standard. Okay, it's actually easy to understand what it means, really. It's like medicine. It's what medicine is. It uses the adversarial spirit, but in a healing way. So that's kind of what that means. Actually, it's interesting that the word that's used for standard also means to be sick. Okay, so the standard is sickness. Okay, so it's a word that means a lot. It means something conspicuous. It means you put it visibly. It becomes visible instead of covert. And it also means that you give it a purpose. And the purpose is to heal. So you can use the snake to heal. That's a good purpose for the adversarial thing. And it makes sense. It looks like it doesn't make sense, but it does. Because healing means, because when you're sick, you need to be healed. There's something in the medicine that's going to be against you, right? The medicine is something that's a little bit against you because you're doing something wrong. Okay, if you're sick, you're doing something wrong. So you got to be kind of corrected. So you got to accept this medicine that's going to tell you something wrong about you. It's like if you go to the doctor, you say, I'm sick, doctor, what should I do? Well, what is he going to do? He's going to kind of criticize you, right? He gives you medicine. He's telling you you're doing this wrong. Let's say, I don't know, you're eating too much salt, or you're not getting enough rest, or you're drinking too much alcohol. I'm just giving examples here. Let's say, so it's like a criticism that he's giving you, the doctor, really. So medicine is like a self-criticism. It's a criticism that you got to accept in order to be healed. So it's adversarial. He's being your adversary, the doctor, when he's telling you, this is what you're doing wrong. You're doing this is wrong. Stop doing this stuff. It's giving you a medicine that's kind of an embodiment of the idea that you're doing something wrong. And now it's going to go against you, against your wrong habits, your bad habits. So that's kind of what it means, the snake on a standard. It kind of means you can use the adversarial spirit. In this case here, when you're sick, the standard means you're sick. If you're sick, you could use this adversarial spirit to heal you. And it has to be not covert, but it has to be visible. You know you're taking medicine. So if I give you something, medicine, without you knowing it, then that's not good, right? It's not visible. It's not what's the name? There's a word I'm looking for. Conspicuous. If you do it covertly, then it's a poison. You know, I'm trying to attack you covertly. I could give you some poison. But if I show you and I'm saying I'm going to give you this poison, this mild poison, that's actually a medicine for you. If you would take this medicine, if you weren't sick, you might get sick, which is usually the case for most medicine, right? If I give you this thing, if you're not sick, you probably will be sick. But if you are sick, then take this medicine and it's going to heal you. So it's kind of that. So it's an adversarial thing that's going to help you. So that's just an example.
So
I don't know what brought me to this, but.
No, it's very interesting because in this way we can say maybe that the fallen angel, Satan, he originally had a function of being an opponent, an adversary, to elevate the human being. And with his corruption, he still uses the same function, but to put you down, to corrupt you, and to condemn you for eternity, right?
Yeah, exactly. This, you just reminded me when you said, also the word standard, the same word, it also means to test. So to test. So when it says put the snake on a standard, the word standard means a test, a trial. Temptation is a trial. You're testing things. You're proving things, right? So it means a lot, that word, but it's all related. You know, if you understand this idea. So yeah, but I mean that's what it means. I think in the Bible, Adam names the animals. That includes the snake, probably. I don't see why not. And then the snake comes, and we often represent the snake on the tree, right? We represent it in all these images. This temptation, we see the snake coiled around the tree. Well, it's the same thing. It's the snake on a standard, okay? And he's just been named by Adam before, okay? So that's why he's on the tree. He's in his place. He's on the pole. He's on the standard. And then so he is there to test, either to test, to improve, for the purpose of improving something. You would test it first. Or because there's someone who was sick, doing something wrong, being sick. So that's probably how we have to think about it, right? He has a name there in that time. But then I guess the snake did something that was not according to that purpose. He went against the standard that he was given. And that's probably why it says too, when after the fall, God says, you will be on your belly. You will crawl on your belly. It's like some people interpret that as if the snake used to have legs, and now that's how the snake lost his legs. I don't think that's what it means at all. I think it means he used to be on the standard. He used to be on the tree or and then he fell from that position to the ground. And now he's on the ground. Now he's a dangerous snake, like in that story before. He's now a snake that bites you and kills you. But he used to be on the standard. He used to be there to heal. He used to be there to test in a good way. Tests are good. They're useful. But in that story, it seems like it means that he went against his function. And so therefore God told him, now you're not gonna be on the standard anymore. You lose your name, you lose your function. You're a covert snake. You're an adversary that humans are gonna crush the head of. We're not friends anymore. It's like, now you're gonna bite my heel and I'm gonna crush your head. Whereas it used to be something else. When the snake followed his rules, his standard, and it was okay. But then in that moment, apparently it didn't, because God punished the snake by removing him from up there and putting him back down. That's an example.
Yeah, he took
Obviously
the
those
lesser role too far,
are
right?
Yeah. It's like we don't. Well, I think what he did, probably. It's hard to know. It doesn't say. I think it doesn't say on purpose so that we can. I think there's many stories in the Bible like that. There's some ambiguity to the story so that we can see different versions of possibilities of why it happened or how it happened. because I think this is one of the strengths of symbolic stories is you can have different versions of it and different interpretations that aren't necessarily contradictory, but that just express different aspects of it. You know, like the story of, well, this is not a biblical story, but I don't know if you know the story of the Pied Piper. You know that story, the Pied Piper?
No.
So it's maybe you've heard of it. It's like a town that has a rat problem. So they call upon someone to clean the town of rats. And then there's someone who comes along and he's playing music. He's playing the pipe.
Yeah.
And then he says, I can cure your city. And so he plays music, and then all the rats follow him into the river. They die. They get drowned in the river. So that's an example of a story that expresses a pattern, a basic pattern. So you see, it's about cleaning. It's related to actually what we're talking about here. Maybe that's why it came to mind there. It's someone who comes, plays music. You see, we're talking about music before, right? And then the rats get possessed by this music. And then he's able to lead them into death, basically, into drowning into the water. So it's fine because it's about saving the city. It's not about saving the rats, you see. But we could see it from the perspective of the rats if we wanted to, you know. But which is kind of what happens, because after that, it says the king or whoever's in charge of that city doesn't want to pay the piper, and then he does the same thing, but with the kids of the people of that town. So he plays the music again, and then the kids follow him into the river and they die. So you see, I said before, we could see it in the perspective of the rats. So that's kind of what it's doing here. It's showing us the perspective of the rats, because now it's you that follows them into the river. But the point I was making with that story, it's actually a story related to what I was talking about with the standard. And it's totally related, because it's about healing from a problem of rats and using music. But then that story has many versions. There's like many versions to it. And in some of the versions, it's the king that refused to pay the piper. And then that's why he does this as a kind of revenge. But there's other versions in which it's not exactly what happens. There's other versions also where he brings the kids to another land. So he doesn't kill them. He just brings them away. And there's another version too, where it's the king or the mayor says, well, you're probably the one who brought the rats in the first place. You see, it's like he figures out, oh, he could bring the rats out. It means he can bring them in. So maybe he's the cause of it in the first place. He brought the rats in the city, and now he wants to be paid to bring them out. It's like a ruse, you know. So that's one version of the story. So just to say, there's like many, many versions of this story. Most fairy tales are like that, right? There's like, we usually have a version that was a little bit more common, but usually if you look, there's many versions of the story with different conclusions and different aspects of it. So it's kind of that in the Bible, but it's done in a very clever way where it doesn't have to have many versions. There's just one version, but this version is open to many possible outcomes or many possible interpretations. So to me, that's a kind of a masterpiece way of writing. You can write a story, you leave it open to different options. It's, to me, that's really high level storytelling. So that's kind of what in the Bible, even in the story of the fall, it's like we don't know what's the snake. Was he sent by God to test Adam, or was he already? Did he do something wrong while he was doing it? Or you see what I'm saying? Like, did he not follow the rules that God has imposed upon this function, which is the tester? We don't know. So probably because it's supposed to have different possibilities, and you're supposed to think about if they wanted the story to be just specifically one thing, it would probably be written in a way where you would know exactly what it was. But since it's not, you're probably supposed to think of all the implications, you know, to think of all the possible outcomes of this story. So yeah, it's often like that in the Bible too.
Yeah. Well, I would like to finish this conversation with something that I am very interested in hearing your opinion. I've heard you say that Christ is the union of all symbols, right? And maybe you can say a little bit, you know, why do you think is that? But also, what would the Antichrist mean then? If Christ is the union of all symbols, what is the Antichrist?
Well, yeah, that's not an easy subject because I don't know really. There's not that much information about the Antichrist really, but I could tell you my opinion about it. I mean, I could tell you what I think. It's not based on much. It's based more just on intuition that I have. My idea of the Antichrist is basically something that precedes Christ. Okay, so it comes just before. Actually, I see it as both. I see it as a pattern or a being that embodies a pattern that comes right after and then right before. Because, you know, if things are a cycle, then there's a moment where it's after and before. You see, you're between the end of one and the beginning of a new. That's kind of how I see this character of the Antichrist, as someone who comes at the end of something, between the end of something and the new beginning of something. You see? So it's both at the end of something and before it restarts. So it's like before something restarts, there's a moment where you don't know if this thing is part of the new beginning or if it's just still part of the end. So the last moments of something, the thing that falls and dies before it is reborn, there's a moment of ambiguity there. That's, we don't know. This thing that's happening now, is it part of the death or is it part of the rebirth? And I see it as both. You could see it as both, actually. It's not like one or the other. It is both. And I think the Antichrist kind of represents that which comes before the rebirth. So you can see why it could be confused with it, because it's the time for a rebirth of something. It's the time. So it's like you're looking for a time for things to happen, you know, like we do in nature. It's like, now's the time for apples, you know, now's the time for this fruit, that fruit. So the Antichrist is in the right time to be the return of Christ. You see, he's in the right time. So if you're looking for signs of seasons and times, you could say, we're in the right time now. So whatever comes now is going to be the return of Christ. But we don't know. There's an ambiguous time just before, and it is the right time. You see, that's why it's so hard to distinguish between Christ and the Antichrist, because if you look at if you know the signs of the seasons and the times and you will know that this is the time for the return, but it's also the time for the Antichrist. You see, so it's like, so what is the characteristic of this being? Well, this is part of what I'm working on, actually. What does it look like? I often use Samson as an example. I think Samson is an example of an Antichrist type figure. There's not just one, but because he has that function of something that looks like Christ. He looks like the king, Samson. He looks like the Messiah in many ways, but he doesn't have yet what it takes. It's like he's preceding it. He's missing something. So he looks like it, but it's not him. So what does it look like? See, this is what I'm working on, so I can't say too much, but what does Christ have that Samson doesn't? The power of resurrection basically is the answer. Samson is like a Christ that doesn't have the power of resurrection. So what he does is kind of suicide, is commit suicide. He's not afraid of death. But if you're not afraid of death, but you don't have the power of resurrection, then you're a fool, right? Like the saints and Jesus, they're not afraid of death because they have resurrection. You see what I'm saying? But if you don't have it, then you should be afraid of death, okay? Because if you don't have the resurrection, you're just like a suicide bomber, you know, something like that, like a kamikaze. That's not the same as someone who dies knowing that there's a resurrection. It's not the same. One of them is like a fool, crazy even person, maybe a little bit based on revenge, like Samson, like accepts to die if he can get revenge. Like, this is what Samson really is all about. The culmination of his being is like, I'm not afraid of death, and I'm gonna die for revenge. But if you don't have resurrection and you're not afraid of death, there's got to be some kind of reason. And it looks like to him it's something like revenge. Whereas when you have the resurrection, then you can die and resurrect. So your death has a meaning now. See, death has a meaning when you have resurrection. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, death is something that has no meaning. Usually it's like a vanity thing, right? You die. What was the point of it all if you just die in the end? No, nothing, right? So if you have, in the case of Samson, he kind of found a reason to die, which is revenge, something like that, right? I'm gonna get revenge. Even if I die, it's okay because revenge. I just want to make sure more of my enemies die than my gang. And that's the reason enough for me to commit suicide, like be a bomber, That's kind of, I think, the Antichrist spirit. I'm still working on these ideas, but I think I'm kind of correct. Whereas Jesus has the resurrection. So he has a reason to die. He has a reason to accept death, which is the resurrection. The meaning of death is not, death now has a meaning. Whereas Samson, it didn't, and he kind of found one, which is an evil meaning. It's like revenge. Revenge is not necessarily evil, but if you compare it to the Christ, what Christ is doing, it's like a really weird shadow of what Jesus did. He accepted death to heal others because he knew the mystery of resurrection. And if you don't have that, then the other option is David. David is the Messiah, really, in the Bible, in the Old Testament. So he is someone who fears death. He fears death. You see, Jesus doesn't fear death. Samson doesn't fear death. David fears death because he doesn't have the resurrection, you see? So these are like complicated matters. But if you ask me what the Antichrist looks like, I would say it looks like Samson. But that's totally my opinion. It's like not based on any doctrine or anything like that. It's really something I'm investigating now in terms of symbolism. Like there could be a moment before the rebirth of return of Christ where there's going to be a moment where Christianity might want to get revenge, right? Something like that. I don't know yet, but I think it's still enough. What I said kind of is enough to have meaning, but I'm still working on these things because the tradition doesn't say a lot about the Antichrist, that much. It's not like a subject that has a lot of information with it, but I think we could still maybe figure out some of it if we just look at the other stories. What comes before the Christ. So Samson is an example of what comes before. Yeah, I don't know if that helps. That answers your question. It's kind of a little bit too vague, I think.
Well, to me, it helps a lot because I am not trying to do some kind of prediction or divination. I am trying to look at the symbolic patterns and how they can repeat themselves. So for me, it's very satisfactory, your answer. But for people that are, taking their first steps in symbolism, maybe they don't really know what you mean, but that's why this will help, right? I think we have talked about everything that I wanted to discuss with you before saying goodbye. I don't know if there is anything that you would like to add to the conversation to give it a closing.
No, not really. Just I think the most important thing to take out of this whole conversation is just maybe the idea that in order to fight the subversive symbolism, you have to learn it. Mm-hmm. Basically, you learn it and you then have what it takes to either consent or refuse. Whereas in the other instance, you're kind of naive and you can be influenced in a way without realizing it. So I think, the solution to the elitists' evil symbolism is to learn it. Learn the traditional symbolism and learn how to understand it and recognize it, Yeah, I think that's sums it up.
I think that's the key of this conversation. It's also what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to I wanted people to feel that like they have a reason to understand symbolism, to learn symbolism. And this is just not some kind of like free marketing that we are giving to the book. We believe that this is really important, more important than ever. And it's also a delightful read. I have humbly participated in it. So of course I am invested in it, but I did it for the love of it, right? So thank you very much, Matthieu, for writing this book, for being open to translating it in Spanish. We made it happen. Thank you for the conversation. And well, maybe there is another time for us to discuss about other things in this channel, because this is your house. The doors are open for you anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye, Matt.